Yo, what's up? This is Dynamics. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's session, we're going to be going over the almighty, legendary Reese Bass. Now, I know this subject has been covered quite a bit, and you can find plenty of tutorials on it. However, today, we're going to take it a little bit further, because I think the Reese Bass can be explored even more. But before we kick into everything, I'd just like to say thanks for landing on my channel. I hope you enjoy what you see today. And remember to like and subscribe, because doing that helps my channel to grow, and that's my intention. My intention is also to help you improve your music production, inspire you, and help you get to the next level. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so we've got a Serum patch loaded up, initial. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at here is the sort of basic fundamental of a Reese, and then we're going to extrapolate on it. So we've got a saw wave. Now, a traditional Reese will start off really simply by taking something like a saw wave, putting it in unison, and playing with the detune. So depending on how far you take it, you can make it sound pretty natural, and then you can get wild and it doesn't sound so good. So that sounds pretty good to me. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the octave down. All right, now one thing to consider is you can use random phase. Now random phase basically changes when the waveform starts on the waveform. So by having this locked down to 0, it's always going to start the waveform at 0 and then go up. What this does with unison is it can create a kind of phasing effect. So if we've got it down at 0, you'll get more of a phase. Whereas when you bring the random all the way up, it's always going to start at a different point. So we're going to hit down to 0. All right, I might increase the voices by 3 so that we've got a voice right in the center in mono. Okay, next thing, we want to put some distortion over this. I'm going to select something a bit different. Right, the other thing that we're going to want to do is maybe play with something like the pitch. So if we go to the matrix here and we select our source, so our source is going to be LFO 1, all right, and our destination is going to be global master tune. All right, now we come over to LFO 1 here, we want to put it in envelope so that it only triggers once. And then we're going to bring it up. So if we go up to 12, that'll give us an octave drop. And we just change the curvature. All right, we'll come over to the actual main envelope of the system here, and we're just going to bring it up to about 7 milliseconds. And we're just going to add a little bit of release. Alright, so we'll add a second oscillator, and we're going to add another saw wave. We're going to bring that octave down to match. Bring the random phase down. Alright, and we're going to raise up the unison on this one. And we're just going to play with the detune. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to slightly detune these from each other. right, so we're getting somewhere now. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add in some filtration. And we can do these in different ways. We can do it with a pure filter. We could also do it with EQ. So the real key to a Reese bass is not only just this fundamental texture that we've created, but it's the way we filter it. So we'll just chuck on a 12 decibel octave filter here. All right, and then we're going to add some drive. I'm going to key filter it, so that way the filter follows the keys I'm playing. Add a bit of resonance. Right, now we're starting to get that ripply sound. Just adjust the fatness. Just bring that down just slightly. Okay, we're going to head back over to our effects section. And we're going to start playing with the tonality and other effects in here and just see what result we get. So we'll try the hyper dimension. Now, obviously with that unison stacked, it's not really pleasing to me. And we've already got detuning in the actual oscillator source. So I'm going to bring that down. But what we are going to do is just see what this dimension sounds like. So dimension kind of adds spatial width, but in a way that doesn't sound like it's overly changing the sound too dramatically. It's a bit like a really short room reverb with a really tiny decay. Just a little bit. We might come back to that, but we'll just see. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a EQ. So we'll bring in this EQ. And when you bring up this EQ, you've got all the main things, like you've got this low shelf and a high shelf is where it automatically defaults to. But what we want to do is we want to use these notch filters here. So we've got two to choose from, right? And then what we can do is we can find like a sound, like a part of the frequency spectrum that sounds good. Right. Now we're going to go somewhere with this in a second, and we're just going to play with the other one. And what we're going to do is the opposite. We're going to notch downwards. You'll notice there that we're starting to get that kind of movement, that textural feel that sounds real wicked inside of Reese basses. So I'm going to rest that about there. So what we're going to do now is there's a couple of options where you could either assign the frequencies of these two notches to an LFO, and that would fix to whatever we make that parameter do, or we could assign it to one of the macro knobs, or we could also assign it to the modulation wheel as well, depending on how you like to work. This will determine what you do. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to assign it to the modulation wheel of the MIDI keyboard here, because I like to be able to control these sorts of things by hand, and it allows me to have human feel. So if you don't do this, definitely think about incorporating it into your workflow. So the first thing is we're going to take modulation wheel, we're going to assign it to the frequency. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to drive it all the way up the modulation wheel. You'll notice that's moving, and we're going to see what it sounds like. Right, and then what we can do is we can just drag the amount. So I'm going to go to there, all right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing with the frequency of the notch here, and we're going to go the opposite way. So let's see what that sounds like. We're just going to drag it up. Right. So you'll notice now when I move my modulation knob, we've got that sweeping effect. All right, so now that we've got that modulation moved into the EQ there, we're going to go another step further. So next thing we want to look at is we're going to have a look at some compression. You could also try multiband. And what I'm doing there is I'm just listening for a quick balance. I'm not overthinking it, just trying to balance that sound out. Nice and fuzzy, so we can compare between the multiband and just general compression. And we'll try it with our modulation. And with general compression. Yeah, I'm digging the multiband more, so we're going to stick with that. Okay, now one thing that you may or may not want to do, depends, is building space into the sound. So we can do that, of course, with reverb. That's our first option, and the other one, which is delay. Now, with reverb, you want to be quite mindful about what part of the reverb's coming through. We don't want it to dominate the sound and wash everything out, because we still want things to be clean and cut through the mix. So first thing is we're going to hear what it sounds like with reverb. So we see we've got some space there. Now the first thing I'm going to do is going to cut out the lows within the reverb. And we can do a bit of high cut too, just to soften that space out around it. That's all right. And we can play with the decay. And we can also play with the space. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it on the default settings for now. Cool, right, we're starting to get somewhere. Now, one thing that you can think about doing, you'll notice how I'm stacking everything in order on here. In Serum, you can move these around really easily. Now, one thing you might want to consider is taking your reverb and putting it before the distortion or before the compressor, because what that does is it kind of juices up that effect. Sometimes it can be beneficial, sometimes it can be destructive. You just got to experiment and see what happens. But what we'll do, we'll throw it in front of the compressor, we'll see what it sounds like. Right, we can really hear that reverb now. Quite big, eh? All right, and what we want to do is we just want to experiment. We could also try plate reverb. Bring that pre-delay down. That sounds pretty cool. Kind of adds a bit of a tail to it without actually hitting right into the sound. Rude boy. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that plate. Sounds dope. We could also just shift it up in front of the distortion so you can hear what it sounds like there. but I like it in front of that compressor. Now, another thing that you could also use is the delay. Now, when you're adding delay to things like basses, the first thing you want to do if you're inside Serum here is you want to take this filter notch, because we don't want to delay the whole spectrum. It'll just get real wild, real crazy, real quick. So we're going to bring this Q down, and we're just going to listen to where the reverb sits. So I'm going to put the mix all the way up. All right, so we can get a bit of that fizz. And what we might do here is we might just put a real gentle amount of movement on the frequency here. Okay, and then we'll bring that mix back down. All right, we'll see what that sounds like in front of the compressor. Or in front of the distortion. Bit too up front. All right, so we're going to leave it over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw this feedback down, and I'm going to put it on dotted. And what I'm going to also do is add in a ping pong. So basically it moves from left to right just to create a bit more spatial awareness. Yeah. Bring that feedback down more. Bring it right down. So I'm just looking for those little phantoms now. That's cool. All right, so now we've got that all dialed in. The last thing you're going to want to look at here is some filtering. So as you remember, we put in this low pass over here. Now the beauty of this being here is it happens before the effects. So when you low pass it and you sweep down the frequency spectrum, it's still running into the distortion, which is still adding harmonic overtones. So you don't roll everything off. If you were putting it right at the end, it would roll everything off. So you still get all that space and stuff that happens around it. So I'm going to leave it there where it's quite fuzzy, and I'm just going to assign to knob 1, the macro knob. All right, so we've got that assigned, and we're going to assign it to the cutoff, and we're going to bring the cutoff so it moves negatively. I'm going to move the knob all the way to 100% so I know where it lands at its final point. See what it sounds like with a 24 decibel roll off. So that's working with the modulation wheel and with macro 1, which controls the low pass filter pre. So we're going to call this low pass pre. Okay. come back to our effects table, and then the last thing here is we're going to add a filter over the whole lot. Now we've got a lot of different choices here. We could just go for a straight low pass filter, say just like a 12 decibel roll off. So what that's going to do, as I was saying, is it's going to cut off everything that it hits after. It's like after everything, so everything is going to get rolled off. All right, and then the other thing that we could do is play around with some of the miscellaneous filters. There's some in here that I think are pretty cool, like the French low pass and the German L pass. So let's have a listen to these. Give it some boof. Interesting. And then the German low pass filter. One thing I wish Serum would do is add in key tracking for this filter just built in straight into it like you have on the oscillator filters over here. But you know, dreams are free. If you're listening to this extra, give it an update. Okay, so we're going to stick with this. What I'm going to do is assign this to macro knob 2. I'm going to drop it negatively. I'm also going to assign the macro here to knob 2 on my MIDI keyboard. We'll drop it all the way up and then we'll go see what it sounds like. Cool. And then the final bit of business here is we are going to put this into mono so that it's only one note. And if you wanted to, you could put in some portamento so that it sweeps between. Rude. The last thing that you could opt to do here is to add in the sub oscillator, but the key here is to put it on to direct out. And the reason we'd want to put on direct out is so that the clean sub signal comes through and circumnavigates around all of the effects. So that way we get that clean sub with all the dirtiness that we've created in the original patch. So we can hear what this sounds like. And you can hear what it sounds like when you run it into everything. What's interesting to notice is that when you do run it through, because we've got another powerful sub frequency coming through, it kind of eats up a lot of those top harmonics and it kind of warms up the sound. So this could be a creative choice that you might want to go with. It's entirely up to you. That's the beauty of this stuff. It's just the texture and the tone you're looking for. And there you have it. You've got a dope as Reese inside of X for Serum. All right, so let's look at a more sort of analog version of this, because originally this is how these basses were created, where the old school dance music was using a lot of outboard gear and all of the beautiful imperfections that come with it. So I've got the Moog Minimoog here. This is made by UAD. It's really good. You should pick it up and have a jam with it, because it's a very, very cool instrument if you're looking for something with a different kind of vibe, especially something that emulates analog properly when you don't have an analog synthesizer. So what we're looking at here, we're just going to make sure we've got a little bit of glide. I've got the glide on. All right, and then we've got our pitch range here, which can be changed. So we're looking at oscillator 1. We've got the other oscillators here, 2 and 3. We've got the volume down on them right now. So we can listen to the pitch. So we're going to sit there at 16. Right, and we've got our triangle wave. So we've got all the different waves. There's, you know, triangle, a variation, and then we've got a saw and a square, and then we've got pulse width. So we're going to stick with a saw. All right, and then we've got that running through here to the input volume, and you can see this light flashing. So it's actually adding a little bit of saturation and clipping. I'll play with this knob so you can actually hear what it does. So there's some overtones. All right, we're going to leave that there. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to bring in the second oscillator. So we're going to pitch that to the same. But what we're going to do is, first thing is we're going to change the pitch of it slightly so that they're detuned from one another. So what's actually happening there, you hear that wobble, it's phase cancellation. So it's mono, but what's happening is because they're oscillating at slightly different cycles per second, they get this sort of phase cancellation. You can check that out actually in one of my other tutorials where I show how to make different kinds of basses. I'll put a link for that somewhere up here. And then what we can do is we can try different waveforms. So that's mixed with the square, it's quite cool. Another thing you can mix it with is pulse width. So I'm going to stick with a square wave here. You'll notice that the overload button starts to get more as the second oscillator is introduced. And we could also try some noise. And then of course everything runs through to a filter, which is up here. So that filter emphasis, that's your resonance. All right, and then we can play with our bend range. So this is a fifth. Or we could opt for a full octave. I'm going to go for a fifth. Right, sounds pretty grunty. Oh, we can do this filter emphasis here. And the amount of contour. And we could also play with changing it from legato to retrig, because you'll notice when I hit other notes, it kind of carries on rather than retriggering. So you can do this, hit that retrig. I'm going to leave it on legato. All right, so we've got the patch set up with the Minimoog. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some processing. So the first thing I'm going to chuck in here is the Morph EQ by Minimal Audio. This thing's really great because it's essentially a EQ, but it morphs. So this is essentially creative filtering in a way that is just like, I had this idea in my head for an EQ the way I wanted to do it, and these guys came up with it, and it's so good. Because to create what this thing does, you would have to do some pretty serious automation with your EQ points to create it. And this thing just has everything built into it. So first thing is I've just made like a little bit of a riff just to keep us in the loop to follow. And I've picked the current preset here just to demonstrate this. And then we're just going to beef up the sound a bit, and then we're going to take it another step further. So that gives us all the movement that we want. The second thing, we're going to add a bit more distortion. And I've used Minimal Audio Rift here just because it was right in front of me because I picked the EQ, so why not? And if we wanted to, we could add some filtering. So chuck on the filter here. The cool thing you'll notice is that when you use the cutoff on the low pass filter and drop it down and it isolates more of the sub frequencies, you can hear that phase cancellation more, which gives you really nice movement if you just want something kind of gritty but sort of warm and smooth underneath your track. Man, UAD absolutely nailed this Minimoog plugin, man. Man, this is already getting me inspired. Okay. Okay, so I quite like having that filter on there. So what I'm going to quickly do is just map that to knob 1 as well. So I can move that. if you're wondering what I'm controlling this with, it's just with the complete control. And, you know, it has 8 knobs in front of it, which you can just assign to any kind of instrument or plugin. And the great thing is iStudio One, once you map it, it will remember it. So every time you bring up that instance, it's just right there. And it's kind of a bit like pseudo having analog gear in front of you, which is really helpful. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. So we've got this little riff here. It's sounding pretty rad. The other thing that we could also play with just in general is the cutoff frequency inside of the actual synth too. Of fun. So I'm showing you this to think about when you're actually making your track. I'm a huge proponent of doing things hands-on, like using your hands, using your human feel to create your music rather than clicking and drawing in your music. You're always bound to get, in my opinion, a far more natural groove and feel to your music by doing it that way. So if you're one of those people who's constantly clicking and drawing and making everything very precise, I'd encourage you to branch away from that a bit and see what kind of result you get. You might be quite surprised. You can always tweak everything a little bit after that to make it fit if it's not quite right. But remember that as long as your drums are tight, then generally everything's going to follow and feel right in the music. So you've got a bit more looseness that you can use in the musical elements and then keep those drums tight. Right, so we've got a long note, and what we've done is we've got the whole patch set up, and what I'm going to do is just record in some automation onto this. So the first thing we'll do is just open up the main patch in the Minimoog, and I've got my ability to control the filter here, and we're going to put this onto right, and we're just going to hit the record button and see what happens. Okay, back to read. And then we're going to move to the Morph EQ here. We're going to put this to right. And I'm going to start moving this parameter around and create some more texture. Right. And then finally, we're going to work with the filter on Rift. Turn this on. Make sure it's assigned. Good. And then we'll put it to right. Awesome. And then we'll just chuck that back to read. And then we can listen back to the automation. Now, what we want to do is we want to bounce this out. So I'm going to bounce it to a new track. And now we've got this UAD-X Minimoog piece of audio, and I'm just going to call this Moog Reese. All right, so there's a lot of options we can go with this, but ultimately what we've created here is a sample. and the sample we can play however we want. So inside of Studio One, there's a real simple approach to this. We could just go in and grab sample 1 and we can load it up in there. And I'm going to tune it. So remember, I played this note in F sharp. And the thing that we can do with resampling this is we can either play it as is, like just playing through the note that we've recorded, or we can change where it starts. That's quite cool there. And then what I'm going to do is draw this back, zoom in. Now notice that it starts on a positive cycle on the start of the waveform, and we want to finish on a negative cycle. So that way they're going from positive to negative to positive. And this is for the reason if you're playing it through on repeat. So, you know, you could have something like a sustain. Or the other option is to go with a ping pong, which is going to make the waveform go forward and backwards. If you're ever working with a sample this way and you get some weird sort of clicks happening, you can use the crossfade. There will usually be a crossfade function, and that'll just help to smooth things out. But because we put this on the positive and the negative, it's sounding pretty sweet, so we don't need it. And then again, we can work with the filter inside of here. So we can just use, say, like a 12 decibel per octave, turn that on. Can add drive. The choice is yours. And then we can just re-emulate what we did where we had glide on it. And then we can further process it. So if I wanted to, I could just grab my Morph EQ that I had on the other original instance and work it. And there you have it. You could be working naughty, rude Reese basses on your tracks in no time. 3 different ways. One synthesized through Serum, one done through a classic analog function like a Minimoog, and then taking the audio and resampling it, where you can process it to your heart's delight and come up with crazy textures. And you can keep resampling if you want until you get something that sounds completely unique and yours. The choice is really yours. It's what you're going for. But remember, when you're doing this, don't just go for the straight out of the box thing. Try take it a few steps further and come up with a tone and a texture that's yours. So that way you've got your own Reeses that are distinct, that are your sound for your tracks. And your tracks will sound a million times better if you do this. All right, so let's just cut this into a bit of a quick loop that I've done, and we'll record in some of that automation, and we'll see where you can take these Reese examples that I've shown you, so that it will hopefully inspire you to go do the same thing with your tracks. Start with the Serum patch. second one. Cool. And then we'll work some of those filters. And then we'll go to our resample from the Moog. And we're going to work with that Morph EQ. And then let's hear the whole thing together. Tech step your heart out. Thanks for joining me, kids. All right, now in all seriousness, if you've enjoyed today's session, please make sure you like and subscribe. I'm going to be doing more content for you guys. I don't want you to miss it. If you've got value out of it, then it will be great to see you here again. But thanks so much for watching this through, and I'll catch you next time. Easy.